All right. We are live here in Facebook. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our inspirational interview for this week. I'm here with one of my first yoga teachers, Cathy Woods. Hi, Cathy.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Yay, so glad you're here. So let me introduce you. Cathy's roots of her teachings the past 30 plus years are expressed not only through her training and education, but her own self-realization and insights from years of a dedicated personal sadhana practice, spiritual practice. Though she maintains her connection to her Kripalu lineage, which is where she started, she teaches the yoga of her heart. Cathy leads programs nationally and has taught at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, Satchitananda Ashram, Yogaville here in Virginia, Mount Madonna Center, and more. Additionally, her horse and yoga programs are led at ranches, resorts, equine centers, and expos around the country. That's all changing now because of COVID, but Cathy just published a book, Yoga for Riders, that was released last month in July.
Last week, actually.
Oh, last week. Wow.
Yeah.
So that book teaches about the parallels of yoga and horsemanship and how to apply yogic principles from the ground to the saddle. Awesome. So excited to have you. So I invited Cathy on to talk with us about creating a personal home practice, a personal yoga practice. So let's start out just with you talking about how you found your own practice. How did you start a personal yoga practice?
Thank you. Well, again, thanks for having me. And my practice actually started before I even knew it was yoga. And that may sound kind of strange, but as a child, I was not exposed to yoga. I didn't grow up in a yogic family by any means, but yet I was doing yoga and had awarenesses about yoga and meditation. And I was spontaneously doing postures and contemplative exercises as little as maybe 6, 7 years old. So it was a really interesting journey. It was almost like it was born into me, kind of cellular and organic. And I have many stories I can share, but one is I would enter into a posture and know that there was some value to prolonged holding of the posture and kind of transcending the mind and staying in. I would sit in full lotus pose, and ironically I would watch like a cartoon like the Flintstones or something, and I would discipline myself to sit in that position for 30 minutes regardless if I wanted to fidget or move or anything. So this was pretty young. And then it was as a teenager, I got more introduced to meditation and found that there was great value in it. I was dancing with the ballet company, and I was finding the value of meditation, remembering my dance routines better, my organizational skills improved, felt clearer, more collected. And then as a young adult, got introduced to formal classes. So initially, to answer your question, it really started within me before it was really a known yoga practice. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just doing it spontaneously.
Yeah. And so it introduced itself to you, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's always felt like a very organic path. And then when I did get introduced to it in a more formal way, it just felt like coming home. It was like something I knew and was going to then dive into much deeper and create a lifestyle out of it.
Beautiful. So when you found the more formal yoga practice and started studying yoga, what initiated you being able to find your own practice within like learning these postures and the Sanskrit names and, the different effects of the energies from yoga, and then you bringing that into your own practice?
Right. Well, again, I think creating my personal practice started even before I had a formal practice. But then when I did get into more formal practice, I realized that, wow, going to a class once a week was was great and valuable, and it was impacting the rest of my week. And I thought to myself, wow, if I were to do this more and really dive into this more and be more dedicated to it, and I was unable to go to classes every day. And that's kind of what prompted the home practice. Was I enjoyed the weekly class so much, and would try to remember as much as I could, and put out my mat at home, and just do what I could remember. And as you know, being a teacher, when you're first learning or teaching the postures, you get on your mat and you think, I don't know what to do. There's just so many things we did in class and I can't remember them. And that's one of the things I want to really focus on today. So for me, my path, my practice grew exponentially when I started implementing a home practice combined with a learning practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think
so do you want to give us some tips on creating a home practice for
I
folks
do.
that... Okay.
Yeah. So the biggest thing I hear from people is, well, I don't know what to do at home when the instructor is not there. And what I always say is, just put down your mat and see what happens. It doesn't, the biggest thing I want to share is your personal practice doesn't have to look like anybody else's practice. It's a personal practice. And I believe that this is where your yoga can really, really grow in new directions. And it can become more of an intimate practice for your own path of growth and self-realization. So a couple of tips that I would recommend would be, first of all, kind of doing some classes with an instructor such as yourself, learning the basic knowledge of yoga, and then putting down your mat and creating a dedicated space. That's really important, that you deliberately put out your mat and you create an environment for your personal sadhana or spiritual practice. The other thing is that when I say yoga, I don't just mean the yoga postures. I'm a big advocate, as you know, from studying with me, of the whole of yoga. So the meditative aspect, the breathwork aspect. So the word sadhana practice is basically your personal practice or your spiritual practice. And it doesn't have to include only postures. So that's a really important point. So when I say creating your personal practice, it could mean sitting down on the mat, doing a few moments of breath work, doing a little bit of meditation, maybe some journaling, maybe entering into some postures, maybe listening to a podcast, maybe reading something inspirational. So there's so many things that fall under the umbrella of what a personal sadhana practice is. So it's not just postures. As you know, there are 8 limbs to the path of yoga. So creating the space, showing up in the space is really important, even if you don't know what to do. And to just sit down and take a few slow, deep breaths and become centered and begin to tap into that inner voice and that inner knowing about what you need on a given day. So for example, some days I'll sit down on my mat for my personal practice, and it just ends up being a practice of breath work, maybe very gentle movement. Other days I feel intuitively that I need to do more vigorous postures. And then sometimes it's a combination of what I call willful or deliberate postures that you say, okay, I know I benefit from warrior poses or chair poses or balance poses, and you do some of those deliberate poses, but then you let that segue into more of a spontaneous practice where you're really listening to your inner voice about, what do I need today? Do I need vigorous? Do I need gentle? Do I just need to breathe? Do I need to just be still and meditate? And it can just, flow in any way. So it doesn't have to look like anything specific. So that's really important. Creating the space, showing up on your mat, and just giving yourself some space to let it unfold.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, a lot of what I teach and goes into my planning of the yoga practices that I am now teaching daily is that awareness of just tuning in, even though other people are joining me for practice, but it's kind of like I'm sharing my personal practice, is tuning into like, what do I need in this day, but also tying in elements from Ayurveda of like, what's the weather today, or what's the season, or, what's the energy. And that is a balancing right? Like as it's been summertime, I'm doing a lot more like low to the ground, not such vigorous heat building practices because there's enough heat in the environment, you know? So that intuitive piece, I think, is part of yoga and Ayurveda coming together in that wisdom of being like, well, what's needed today? Not the like, I have to follow these rules or do 20 sun salutations or whatever it is.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And as you know, we have, different qualities of consciousness. We're either operating from centered, grounded, nervous, scattered, sleepy, tired. And so many things factor in, as you know, with Ayurvedic, seasonally and weather and our diet and how much rest we've gotten and what's going on in our lives. So each time you visit the mat, it's a different day.
Right.
So just listening to what do I need that day, and the movements you do if you get into asana practice, don't even have to be asanas per se. They can just be movements that feel good and right to your body. And again, that can be combined with moments of stillness, or I like to keep a pen and paper and a journal nearby. I might, in the middle of something, have some awareness or epiphany that I want to write about or remember later. So again, it can kind of morph into so many different aspects of yoga beyond just the asanas. But
Right.
listening to the inner voice is just huge. And that's not something that is just confined to the yoga mat. Listening to that inner voice in our daily lives of where's our energy today. If I'm not centered, grounded, it might not be the best day to write a contract or enter into some agreement or an arrangement with somebody. So honing into when we're in the best space to do things. And the more we do that on the mat, the more that starts to transition into right choices in other areas of our lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think about people that I've worked with that are, when I'm like, hey, do some yoga at home or whatever, and they're like, I don't know where to start. There's that piece of self-trust, which we could also call intuition, but there's also a fear that people have of doing yoga poses incorrectly or maybe hurting themselves. And there's like feeling that they need somebody there to check them and make sure that they're doing it right. What's your response to that fear? Or
My response to that would be to, again, just really be gentle with yourself and let the practice unfold. So they again don't even have to be yoga postures. So if you're feeling fearful about, well, I don't want to injure my knee, or I don't know if my alignment is right, then just do movements. I mean, just intuitive movements. Again, they don't even have to be yoga. It could just be something as simple as, breathing with your arms inhaling up and inhaling down, or just an interlace and press and stretch. I mean, they can just be very mindful, subtle movements. They don't even have to be the bigger, more challenging postures. And then as you work with an instructor, with a teacher, and you get more confident in that, then you'll find spontaneously you'll start interweaving that. But don't feel like the personal practice has to be a big practice or look even the same as you do in class.
right.
And
Yeah.
as you know, there's so many simple postures that we can do, such as cat cow, or a little crescent moon, or things that aren't quite as technically challenging,
Right.
and to maybe stick with those if you're feeling fearful. But I always say in my classes, you are your own best teacher. Listen to your body. Yoga should never be painful. So if you experience anything beyond a little challenge or a little discomfort, or you can't take a deep breath, that's a good gauge to back off whatever it is that you're doing, whether that's in your personal practice or with an instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So listening to that inner guide. Um,
Mhm.
So I just want to pause here for a moment and just say, for those of you watching right now, we have a good little group on here. Feel free to write in questions that I can ask Cathy, and feel free to ask away. And I'll relay them to Cathy, and anything's game. She's very knowledgeable, so take advantage
I've
of
been
her
doing,
being here.
thank you. Yeah, I've been doing this a while. Again, I think I was kind of born into yoga, but have been formally teaching for about 30 years. And it's really enjoyable for me to watch people getting involved in yoga, learning about it, but then really creating their practice. And that's where that little light bulb moment goes off, like, oh, this is what yoga is. This is, really, it really is a path of self-realization. That's what we call yoga, a path or practice to self-realization. And nobody can give that to you. Teachers like myself and Hannah, we can guide you along, but ultimately it is that time, rich quality inward time you spend with yourself that allows it to grow. And we all have the ability to extrapolate universal truth. It's out there for all of us. And it's just learning to be still and be aligned and listening to that inner voice. And I think that's so important, again, on and off the mat.
Right. Yeah. And I think about that inner voice piece in terms of creating a personal home practice. And I know that I did this early on. I took a lot of classes with you in my 20s. And when I would do practice on my own, I would hear your voice in my head, right? I'm like, Cathy, because there's things that repeat. And I'm sure those of you who do yoga with me frequently or have practiced with me for, 7-8 years at this point, hear my voice in your head. And that's a great place to start, to kind of like tune into the radio station of the teacher you're used to hearing in your head. And listen to like, well, what postures are linked together from the classes that you've attended. There's some basic little flows that all teachers seem to find like their personal favorites that they like to incorporate into classes, and that tuning into that radio station in the mind can really help you initiate that, like being alone on your yoga mat doing your thing, and make it less scary. So I think that when I reflect on my path as now a yoga teacher, initially just a yoga student, that I took a lot of classes with you and then would hear your voice in my head.
I'm glad I was in your head, Hannah.
And I know that some of the things that I say as a teacher now came from you too.
Yes, and we all do that, and
Right.
my guru, my teacher, I hear him and in my head as well, and some of the things that I share and teach are quotes from him and things that I've learned. So we're all just sharing. None of us really have an original thought. We're all just kind of extrapolating this stuff, and it's kind of interconnected and overlapping, and that's great. I think that's what makes it good and interesting and genuine and heartfelt. And we each bring in little pieces to that tapestry of part of our own path and our own journeys.
Yeah. One of the things.
I was going to say, that is the importance of studying with a teacher. So personal practice is good and valuable and huge in your growth. But again, I want to stress that it is most beneficial combined with when you are also working with a teacher, because there are things that you're going to learn from that teacher and then can incorporate into your practice. But so I don't want to negate studying with a teacher just to do a home practice. I think the two go hand in hand.
Yeah. And it sounds like you really want to empower people to bring yoga home and into their personal space and to feel empowered to play with it, really, and see what happens when you give yourself permission to do yoga on your own, but then also be informed by studying with somebody or several people who are trained in yoga.
I agree.
Yeah.
And then you were going to say something, so go ahead. Do you recall?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I do have a little list that I hand out to my students when I teach this Creating Your Personal Practice workshop. And a couple of the things on there that I think are important, creating your space. This is a really fun homework project. I do have a video about it on my YouTube channel. I love assigning this project because I love hearing the feedback from people. It's a creative time. Maybe you don't have a whole room in your house you can dedicate to a yoga studio, but maybe you have a guest restroom that's not in use, or a little nook on your porch, and you set up a deliberate space where you can put out your mat mindfully, maybe leave it out, maybe you can't, maybe you have to set it up each time, and bring things into that space that are meaningful to you. Maybe you like, rocks or feathers or seashells or pictures of your teacher or guru, or whatever makes you feel safe and comfortable. So creating that space is a fun project, but it gives you a dedicated space to go to. The other thing is we, and you know this in Ayurvedic, we all have better times of day than others, based on our constitution. So define what a good time of day is for you. Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Look at your lifestyle. Maybe you can't do yoga in the morning because you're getting the kids ready for school, or like me, you have animals to feed and chores to do in the morning. So you find that window that works best with your lifestyle. That's also important in creating your practice. And the other thing is to set a reasonable amount of time. Don't set the bar so high that you're going to set yourself up for failure. So to say, oh, I'm going to do an hour of yoga every day at home, that might be a little ambitious. I would rather see somebody do 15 mindful minutes of breath work, meditation, yoga on their mat, rather than a scattered hour. So define time of day, and also how long of a practice works for you. And then what's really sweet is if you do have times that there are not time constraints, you may find that you get on your mat and you think, oh, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes, and 45 minutes go by like magic because you enter that timeless zone, and it just becomes something you just want to continue to stay in and very immersed in it. So that's enjoyable when you can take it to that level as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. That just called out to me. I'm like, I want to do that.
Good.
I rarely do that. Like, just get on my
Yeah.
mat, just like
Yeah.
time. I have time. Yeah, we get so scheduled and structured in our days. It's
We
lovely
do. We do.
idea. Yeah.
And now is such an unusual and strange time for all of us. Everybody's navigating the new normal, and they're not going to yoga classes as much in person. So this is really a good time to nurture your own practice, create it, shape it, and just play with it. Again, it doesn't have to look like anything. That's the freedom of it, that it's your personal practice. And
Right.
what else is helpful too is keeping a little sadhana journal, I call it, or just a little journal of your experience. You might notice some days, gee, I sat down on my mat and I could barely focus. I was doing good just to breathe today. And then other days you'll go on your mat and have a more rich, deeper experience. So that fluctuates as well, but kind of keeping a journal and seeing how your personal practice is growing and progressing. And
Mm.
then another really important component too, Hannah, is have like-minded people that you can share with. Because when you're on your mat and you're in this deep, rich time with yourself, stuff can come up, whether it's just questions about the practice or emotions that come up or shifts that happen. So it's very important, I think, to surround yourself with supportive people that you can share your experience with.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, is to have that support network and community, Kula, to
Yeah.
be able to really, well, also just to digest and integrate the experience, right? To know that there's other people doing the same thing. And yeah, what I was going to say before is that I think part of the practice too is to be really in the physical being that you're in. One of the things that has been interesting for me as a yoga teacher is to have people frequently say, but I don't look like you. And that to mean something is bad or wrong. And
Right.
and I think a real gift of creating a personal home practice is that you're not trying to look like you're not looking at somebody else and saying like, I want to look like them, or we have different body structures, right? And from Ayurveda, we know there's Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and like our bodies are just going to be built differently and look differently and
Mm-hmm.
move differently, and that's all good. Like there's not a wrong way to be. And so I love that idea, like that you were talking about, with just getting on your mat and just seeing how your body
Mm-hmm.
wants to move. And maybe you hear the voice of the teacher in your head, but a little more exploration instead of looking externally and like, I need to look like that, to look
Yeah.
internally and think, I feel this, or when I shift slightly to the side in this pose, oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that changes something. It's more of a internal reflection than looking for that external reflection.
Exactly. And I think too, it can be liberating to not attend a class and to not have that distraction of looking or comparing and just being in your own experience.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of all my classes, and I'm sure you've heard me say this 1,000 times, is do not compare yourself to anybody in the class, because I promise you, you're all going to look different. Everybody's body moves differently, as you said, different body shapes, different body types, and no two of us look the same in any posture. So it's so important to not compare. And that's the beauty of your own personal practice too, is there's nobody there to compare yourself to. You're just there with you.
Yeah.
And to kind of tap on something else you said, like micro movements. A lot of time in class, when we're being instructed, we don't really get into those subtleties and the micro movements. It's more mechanical or willful, like, okay, we're doing this posture and we're holding it for this long, and then we're moving into this next thing. And but to get into a pose and maybe stay in that pose and just play with those little tiny subtle micro movements and shifts. And you can, in your own practice, you can stay in a posture however long you want.
Right.
And your personal practice might be 2 or 3 postures. That might be it, because they're so yummy and you're enjoying them, that it's like, oh, I just want to stay in spinal twist and kind of keep exploring that, or in forward bend, and just play with the subtleties of the postures.
Yeah, I love that. Um, so Kathy Ayers just wrote in and she said, do you find playing music adds to your personal alone practice?
That's a great question, and it's optional. I personally like to practice in silence. I even like to teach my classes without music a lot of times. But I find sometimes for new people, creating a personal practice to have a little light music in the background is good. It makes it a little less quiet, a little less intimidating to be there with yourself. And then also, music helps us to move, just like, when we dance to music. So to maybe have some gentle music playing and just tap into that vibe and allow your body to move to the music might be another helpful way to help you start entering into movement and postures. So I would say personal, and mix it up. Try some silent and some with some tunes.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Kathy, for writing in a question.
Yeah.
Oh, Kathy Ayers to Cathy Woods. um, fellow Kathys, spelled differently. So Cathy Woods, tell us about your big release that just happened, just to let people know about this book you just wrote.
Yeah, so I'll put it on display here. So in addition to being passionate about yoga, my other passion is animals in general, but particularly horseback riding and horses. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's yoga for riders. Is that showing up there?
Yep.
Great. Okay. And so I've been teaching yoga about 30 years, but the last maybe 10 or 12 years, I started seeing what I was doing in my yoga practice. I was also applying to my horsemanship. And the lesson here for those non-equestrians that are tuning in is the stuff in this book is applicable to horsemanship, but also to anywhere in your life. So what I discuss a lot in there is about the energy that we bring to our horses, but you can apply it and say, what energy are we bringing to life? Are we bringing, centered energy? Are we bringing nervous energy? Are we bringing fearful energy? So the book talks a lot about energy and how that interacts. Horses happen to be a good mirror for that. Also, I focus a lot on pranayama, on breath work in there, and how that can be used off the yoga mat and into horsemanship. Again, for non-equestrians, you can use breath work, in a traffic jam to help calm you down. So many of the teachings in this book are kind of parallels of yoga and horsemanship, but really, if you look at it a little deeper, it really can apply to anything and everything. It's about the mindfulness that we do things with, whether it's riding horses or, kayaking or listening or hiking or anything. So,
Yeah.
so that's a little about the book. I do teach at the various equestrian centers and ranches. Sometimes I'm teaching to equestrians with their own horses. And then other times I have people that don't have horses. They just want to have a weekend experience like that. And they'll join me at one of the ranches for a weekend Find Your Inner Cowgirl retreat or Body Mind Equine retreat. So it's a lot of fun, and it's very rich and very learning experience when we can bring our yoga off the mat and into other arenas.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, and where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about what you do?
Yes. So Cathy Woods Yoga, it's Cathy with the C, Woods with an S. I'm sure Hannah will post that. CathyWoodsYoga.com is my website. My book has been published by horseandriderbooks.com. You can go on my website and link to that, where you can search it directly. I also have a YouTube channel, and as Hannah knows, I'm not the most techie person in the world, so I haven't nurtured my YouTube channel that much. However, I do have some videos on there. One is about a 40-minute gentle yoga class with me. And then a couple of videos about what we talked about today. I give you a little tour in one of them of my personal yoga space and how I created that, and some of the objects in my space and what they mean to me. So there's a few videos on my YouTube channel that you might find helpful, and I hope to add more, and that's Cathy Woods Yoga as well. Instagram and Facebook. I always appreciate follows. It helps me grow what I do. And I'm really passionate about posting things, not just about the physical aspect of yoga, but just like Hannah does, kind of wellness and life tips in general.
Great. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure having you on today, and I'm always grateful when I get a chance to connect with you. So thanks for being here. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. And if you have questions if you're watching this replay, feel free to post questions below, and we can respond to those too. So
Yeah.
thanks, Cathy. Any
Yeah.
parting words?
Well, I want to thank you for having me, and I just love our longtime connection. As Hannah said, I was one of her first teachers, and it's just been a pleasure to watch you grow into a beautiful yogini and teaching and sharing and enriching people's lives. So that's my parting words to you. And for those out there, nurture your home practice. It's a beautiful thing, and everyone stay safe and blessed. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much, Cathy. Be well.
You're welcome. Be well. Bye now.
Bye.